Yet another podium for Lando Norris as his season goes from strength to strength. But it wasn't without controversy as his 5-second penalty cost him valuable time. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen did an impressive job and was in a world of his own, to the extent that we barely even saw him on the live TV feed. There's a lot to look at, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Austrian Grand Prix. Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Lando Norris, driver of the weekend. What a race for Lando Norris. This was an unbelievable drive and it was fully deserved after an amazing qualifying session for the McLaren driver on Saturday afternoon, where he managed to secure a front row start. It was a great race for the British driver as he managed to stick with the Mercedes car in the breakaway pack from the midfield. To have achieved this kind of result in a McLaren car is astonishing, and even Lewis Hamilton was praising the young Brit on the radio as he was able to keep the Mercedes driver behind for 20 laps in the opening stint. So it's got to be a green box for Lando Norris this afternoon. Despite that 5-second penalty for Lando Norris, he still managed to deliver a podium result for the team. And for me it was a 50-50 incident, and even Christian Horner said on the Sky feed that he believed it was a racing incident himself. I always thought that the start of the race and on race restarts there would be an understanding that the cars would be fighting closely and that the stewards would be more lenient on incidents on these kinds of laps. But when Lando Norris held his ground, as Perez was trying an opportunistic move on the McLaren car down into turn 4, it felt to me like there shouldn't have been a penalty, as whilst the Red Bull driver was alongside Norris, it really wasn't his corner. I have the exact same opinion of the later incident where Perez forced Leclerc off at the exact same corner. They were both racing incidents, and yet they both resulted in 5-second penalties. I'm going to talk about the FIA later in this video, but it was a very frustrating incident on this occasion, especially as it cost Norris a position to Bottas in the end as he served his 5-second penalty in the pits, and I do believe he could have had second if it wasn't for this. This is the kind of hard racing that we love to see as Formula 1 fans, but it feels like it's being discouraged as a result of these actions. But in the end, it didn't matter too much for Norris as he still managed to find a way to get onto the podium, and it was a convincing one at that as he achieved the feat for the 3rd time so far this season. It was a shame as he was able to race at the pace of Bottas in the end, so if he'd have avoided that penalty as I said, it could so easily have been second and another step up the podium this afternoon. But Norris is having his best season ever in Formula 1 and has proven so many people wrong, as he starts to make a bit of a habit of scoring Formula 1 podiums. Mercedes Championship priorities already. My next point to look at is a bit of an interesting one and relates to the Mercedes team and their call to Bottas to ask the Finnish driver to keep himself behind Lewis Hamilton despite that leading car having damage, which was costing him valuable time. So it's an amber box as I'm not too sure of what to make of these race orders. This initial call was interesting as a couple of races ago the team was saying to the media that they wouldn't be using team orders this early into the championship. However, with Hamilton sat on 150 points and Bottas behind on 92 after today's race, it seems like they wanted to use Bottas to try and protect their lead driver on this occasion. Ultimately, it didn't end up happening, and they did choose to swap their drivers a few laps later for fear of Norris getting past them both, but they did ask them to hold station on the radio in the first instance. Does this suggest that the Mercedes team are fearful of this championship battle between Hamilton and Verstappen? They know that they need to fight for every point, but the damage that had been done to his car was just too much on this occasion and dropped into 4th position come the checkered flag. It was costly for the championship, but it seems like Hamilton is clinging on until the Mercedes upgrades arrive after what's been 2 incredibly dominant drives in a row at the same track for Max Verstappen. For me, these team orders do get an amber box as it suggests that the Mercedes team don't have a lot of confidence right now in this championship fight. A great track for overtaking. The Red Bull Ring is one of my favourites, so after 2 races here I think it's deserving of a green box for this weekend. The track has absolutely everything. It's got enough overtaking opportunities with hard braking zones at the end of long straights, undulation which gives drivers challenges when deciding when they can and can't brake, and gravel runoff zones which punishes mistakes. It might not have been the best race last weekend, but you know that this track can and will deliver. There aren't many tracks that I'd be happy to have 2 races at, but this is certainly one of them, and it's done it for 2 years in a row now. As for the drivers that made those overtakes, most of them came from drivers that started outside of the points paying positions, as Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo and Charles Leclerc all had impressive drives to work their way up the order to finish 5th, 7th and 8th respectively. The Ferrari and McLaren cars are well ahead of those other midfield cars this year, and these drivers know how to get overtakes done when they have that opportunity. It was great to see this battle through the midfield, and I almost wish that this wasn't the end of this era of regulations. FIA Inconsistencies. My next point to discuss is the inconsistencies in penalties applied by the FIA. This weekend, a new rule was introduced to say that no cars could run slowly between turns 9 and 10 in order to create space between them and the car in front. This was a sensible call, as it was looking incredibly dangerous during free practice 2 on Friday, with so many cars queuing up behind each other before they started their flying laps. It was heading towards a potentially seriously dangerous incident, as some of the cars came past on flying laps, and the closing speed was absolutely horrifying. But once it was in place, the rules weren't enforced. So it's an amber box for the FIA for me this weekend, as it is starting to become a theme through 2021, where there have been inconsistencies in the way that the rules have been applied. After the turn 9 and 10 rule was introduced, there continued to be issues, particularly in Quali 2, where a number of cars continued to slow down to create space to the cars in front. Those called to the stewards were Valtteri Bottas, Carlos Sainz and Sebastian Vettel, following an incident which forced Fernando Alonso to abort his final Q2 lap, and potentially cost the Spanish driver a spot in Quali 3. It was Vettel who was the final car in that train, which ultimately got in the Alpine driver's way, and even the German driver had to abort his final run, as he had to slow down to get out of the driver's way. Now there are a few points to unpick here, but the first is the fact that Vettel's race engineer did a dreadful job of letting him know about the faster cars coming up behind him. On the radio he said he had plenty of time, and then let him know about Alonso after Vettel had already made an evasive action. But, more importantly, is the fact that all three drivers were called to the stewards for this train of cars, but only Vettel got penalised with a 3-place grid penalty. Now obviously if you just look at the footage of the incident in isolation, it's an easy penalty, and I do believe it was a justified grid drop in the end for the Aston Martin driver. But Bottas and Sainz were both let off, with the press notice saying the stewards determined that too many drivers contributed to the situation, and therefore the driver concerned is not fully to blame. Now this is quite frankly ridiculous from the FIA. They've basically given the drivers a free pass to say that if they all do something, nobody will be penalised. That's simply not okay. The decision was made to put this rule in place on safety grounds, so if any of the drivers weren't getting up to speed after turn 9, then they should be receiving penalties. It feels like Vettel has been a victim himself here, after the fact that he couldn't get up to speed because of the cars ahead of him. It's a bit like a traffic jam on a motorway. It's still moving and the cars at the front won't really notice, but the cars at the back are heavily affected. That got a little bit ranty, but these inconsistencies need to be ironed out by the FIA if they want to maintain their credibility. However, when it comes to the Norris and Perez penalties, they were at least consistent, even if I disagreed with them, as I mentioned earlier. So it's a deserved amber box for the team this weekend, and it could be a red box in the future if this kind of thing continues. Max Verstappen in a class of his own. We didn't really see Max Verstappen this afternoon, and that's because he disappeared off into the distance in what could well be his strongest drive in Formula 1 so far. It was an unbelievable race from the Dutchman, as he even had enough of a gap behind him to go for the fastest lap bonus point on top of his 25 points for his race win. And with Hamilton down to 4th position today, it was another huge haul of points as he's starting to stretch his legs in the lead of this championship with a 32-point gap after this weekend. So it's got to be a green box for Verstappen today. Red Bull have finally delivered a car that Verstappen can deliver with, and he's doing so with ease right now. His maturity in every single race and race weekend is impressive to say the least. For a 23-year-old, he's absolutely ready and capable of achieving his first World Championship this year, and he's come on so much from the 17-year-old that first joined the sport in 2015, as he's developed as a driver and learned to iron out his mistakes. He's becoming a complete driver, with the only thing missing being that World Championship. He'll be revelling in this opportunity as it gets closer and closer, and it will be interesting to see if he maintains this level as the pressure builds. That is, of course, if the pressure builds. Honourable mentions. On to the honourable mentions now, and I think I have to give a shout out to George Russell once again. The first out of my out there pre-season predictions has happened, as the Williams driver made it through to Q3 for the first time, and he even did it on the medium compound tyres. It was a great result, and it could have been points with a bit more luck this afternoon, but I remain confident that they will come. The other honourable mention has got to be for Yuki Tsunoda. To make the same mistake and cross the white line on the pit entry twice implies he isn't learning from his errors, which is a poor showing from the Japanese rookie. He needs to learn from this and start to improve, or his F1 career will be very short indeed. So those are my 5 things we learned from a great race in Austria. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and what I missed. And if you've enjoyed this video and watched this far, then make sure you leave the video a like and hit the subscribe button for more in the future.